happiness of independency and the blessings of a private station over the troubles and vexations of the public service. That is to say, government. And yet we must all recognize these tumultuous times remind us that we have an overwhelming sense of duty. In times of crisis, there can be no more important subject than that of government, and hence I am brought here once again to the capital city. For the next contingent of you, this tumultuous time, certainly last spring into summer of 1776, I'm aware that I had gained some notoriety. I am primary author of our Virginia Declaration of Rights and Constitution. I remind you that I am primary author, meaning that if there are parts of it that you like, I wrote those. If there are parts that you don't like, we may commiserate together, for it did go to committee before being ratified. And for the last contingent of you, I imagine the smallest who have been familiar with my name for some time, I know that my foray into politics began some time ago, though I have enjoyed my retirement since, and here I find myself returned, and I know what my political adversaries have said of me these great many years. I know that it is said that George Mason is short in temper, George Mason is sour in demeanor, that Colonel Mason is curmudgeonly in mood, that Colonel Mason is altogether the most unsociable beast you might ever fall upon. Please understand, all of this which is said about me it is true, but it is not the entirety of the truth. I should be the first to admit to you that I am not a man who suffers fools lightly. It seems that every year that passes, I am taught that there are more fools in the world than the last. I know that I am a man that might be the greatest thorn in your side, especially if I'm a political adversary. However, that should mean, inversely, if we are in agreement, I might be one of the most bull-headed champions that you might find. I should also say this, as I have already stated, I'm a man of private condition first and foremost. When I come here to the capital city, I miss my home, though I promise you I may be warm to friends, loving to family, hospitable in my beloved Dunstan Hall. No, it is my own son who has described his father as jocular and unbending. And so, if we are to spend the next better part of a half an hour in one another's company, let us have the jocular Colonel Mason, and not the unbending one, yes? And so let us try one last time, and I bid you all good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
There we have it. We finally come upon something acceptable. Now, I come here with a rather appropriate, in my mind, purpose, that is to speak to you, the people. As I stated, I gained notoriety approximately a year ago, as I was primary author of that document that does declare that all powers vested in and consequently derived from you, the people. And so, as we move forward this experiment of government, I must speak with you, the people. How else are those of us who now are given the task to run this new government to do so appropriately? It does also bring me to another question. As I find myself briefly upon a committee of men charged with the revision of the laws here in Virginia, with a question, one that I think is paramount in this. If we must revise the laws, what is truly the purpose? And brings me over to a greater question, that one of humanity in its entirety, and frankly, of this our revolution. I put it to you. What do you believe is at the heart of this cause, this fight for independency, at the heart of our Commonwealth here of Virginia? My question is this: is man's nature that he is ever-changing or truly constant? Is the purpose of this, our revolution, one of change or maintenance of status quo?
Change. Change.
I hear a few of you speak out quickly. Change. What say the rest of you? Is it that you disagree, or are too cowardly to speak in such things? Oh, I appreciate that. Well, it is a question. There is that aspect that I might recognize both sides of. After all, the question is, and ever changing. Well, I put it to you. Do you feel that you are the same person you were when you woke up this morning? How many feel that you are the same person that you were when you woke up this morning?
What? Me?
Oh, yes, very little has changed. These are the clothes that I put on. My opinions have not altered greatly. Of course I am the person that I was when I woke up this morning. As much as I might wish to deny him and his debts, they are one and the same. Yet we merely stretch such things out. How many of us feel that we are the same person we were a week ago?
Yeah.
Still some hands raised, and yet. How many here feel that you are the same person you were 6 months ago? A year ago?
Yeah.
And yet a year ago, in this May of 1776, were we not yet still subjects of a crown? One we were at war with, but we still would have to describe ourselves as subjects, not as we may today as denizens of this new commonwealth. Do we feel that we are the same person that we were 5 years ago? Yet hands might still wish to be raised. I recognize if you are not forgotten or lost. No, we recognize that idea of the ship of Theseus. We are all familiar with this, the ship of Theseus, which is constantly replaced as boards rot out, sails being repaired and replaced, and yet it still remains the ship of Theseus, even if every part had been replaced. Yes, man may change, but that does not alter who he is truly, deep down. But I must confess, I'm a man that believes that we are ever changing. I believe that I've demonstrated at least somewhat to you. After all, how very few of us think we are the same person we were 5 years ago, 10 years ago. No, I should be the one to demonstrate it for you. The man who stands before you now, the man who is primary author of our Declaration of Rights, of our Constitution, wrote to a friend some 7 years ago in London that you could not find 5 men of sense in all of America who would take independency if it were offered to them. I changed my mind. Yet, there was something constant in that man as well. After all, I said within the same exact letter that yes, we owed a duty to our mother country. But so too, we would not be slaves to England. What we heard since, oh yes, those London merchants loved to decry those members of Parliament. How hypocritical of those Virginians to decry themselves slaves while they are the ones who hold human bondage, chattel as property. I should say yes. Here in Virginia, we well know what slavery looks like. Perhaps who better to know slavery than the master? Every gentleman here is born a petty tyrant, practicing acts of despotism and cruelty. We see what happens when rights are stripped away from a people by piecemeal, bit by bit. And thus, I stand before you a man admitting to my change. And if I am someone who believes, maybe you agree, maybe you do not, but it is within man's nature to be ever changing, why did it take so long to declare independence? It has been over 2 years since blood was first shed there in New England. We had been at odds with our mother country for 10 years. And yet, why did it take until the summer of 1776 to declare ourselves independent?
Fear.
Many of you demonstrate it right now wonderfully.
Fear.
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 Why do you not speak up now? Why did we not speak up earlier? Fear for being wrong. Fear for the outcome. Fear for what should happen if it not go in our favor. We all recognize, though blood had been shed, the war had broken out, that to declare ourselves independent, does that guarantee our freedom?
No.
No, certainly not. We might cast off an English king, but what should happen if a French one should take its place? or a Spanish monarch, a Tsarina of Russia, a Divan of Turkey, what of a tyrant or demagogue of our own making? Be it for such a thing. I ask this of you. Are all wars that are fought revolutionary?
No.
No. Just as many wars have been fought to maintain status quo. That might be fought over a line drawn by our predecessors. Over a creed and a belief we had no part in forming. And so for this reason, a great many men were afeard to declare ourselves independent. It is for that reason my belief that the greatest thing that happened in the war today, this is what you get when you come to a capital city. It is my belief. Change is always happening around us, isn't it? Not always for the better. Greatest thing to happen in this war today happened in that very building, the 15th of May, almost a year ago, 1776. There must be at least a few who are familiar with what happened there on the 15th of May, 1776. Yes, I thought I might. Others? Yes? Though I imagine even what you were thinking on and what I am thinking on may be ever so slightly different. For those of you who did not raise your hand, who are unfamiliar, there upon the 15th of May, 76, a vote was taken, yes? The result of which, unanimously, to send a representative north to that Congress of Philadelphia with instructions to that respectable body to declare these united colonies free and independent states. Resolved of all allegiance to and dependence upon the Crown and Parliament of Great Britain. No declaration could have come in July 1776 from Philadelphia without first the unanimous vote that happened there upon the 15th. That is what you were thinking on, yes?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and this is why I say it may be different. Yes, now we know what has resulted in that initial vote, but something else happened, and in my mind, the greater still. For those men recognized, if you are going to do away with the old, what must you do? Replace it, create anew. You could not just get rid of the old government without placing one forward. And what was greater still, in my opinion, is here, in that moment, those men gave us an opportunity that we might define what this, our cause of independency, might be. We had the ability, the opportunity to define the soul of what a free and independent Virginia, America, might see for itself. No longer terra incognita, but instead we might have a destination that we might strive for, that we may have at least some of a map we wish to follow. That, in my opinion, is what happened that day. For those men called for the creation of a Declaration of Rights and such a plan of government as was most likely to maintain the peace and order and secure the liberties of a people. That, in my opinion, were the greatest thing in this war to date. I will admit, I keep speaking as though I were not there. I was elected to be a member of the 5th Virginia Convention. However, I had arrived some days later. A smart fitted gout detained me at home, but immediately upon my arrival, I was appointed to that committee. Before I proceed, lest you think that I lose myself too easily to high-minded rhetoric, I'm curious, how many here have ever sat upon committee before? Yes, some of you. Well, some of you may sympathize with me. Mm-hmm. For you see, for those of you who are familiar with our conventions or have ever sat upon committee yourself, you'll be unsurprised to hear that that particular collection of men was, as is our custom, overcharged with useless members. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now mind, please, I do not wish to call the integrity of these men into question. It was not that they were useless members or necessarily too many. I only mean that the law of numbers insists wherever two politicians are gathered, lest one must at least be useless, yes? No, it were not the ability. There are a great many men of ability and integrity within this group. No, it were not that were its sin, but instead its sheer size. I am a man has already admitted to a preference for silence and solitude, and so it will be unsurprising to hear that I would have wished for a very small committee to create this draft to send to the committee of the whole. But I recognize that we cannot do away with one monarch and put the crown upon another singular head. I recognize the necessity of committee, for it should not be all from the opinion or mind or heart of one person. No. I recognize as I look out amongst you, there are those of differing personalities than myself. I recognize you are of differing minds. I might have been pleased to have some 3 men upon that committee, and you might have disagreed. The gentleman here, seeming about as sociable as myself, might have insisted upon a similar number. Some 5 men, yes? If that. And yet, the good lady here, seeming far more sociable than the gentleman and myself put together, might have insisted some double that number, some 6 to 10, yes? Maybe. You try our patience, madam, but I could have allowed it. Do you think it were just some 10 members of that committee? It was not. Do you think it were just some 15 members upon that committee?
No. No.
No. Do you think some 20 members upon that committee?
More.
More. I heard a number here. 30. 30. Do you think I would have wanted 30?
No.
Do you think I would have been happy if it was only 30?
Yes.
Happier than I was with it. I was number 36.
Ooh.
A third of the convention in its entirety sat upon that committee. Do you imagine much was accomplished?
No.
No. No, we lost ourselves to 1,000 clashing and jarring proposals when what was needed was a few men of ability and integrity, whose country's interests were first in their hearts. Men that would wish to apply not only these new philosophies discussed in the salons of France, the coffee houses of London, the taverns of Virginia, yet little reflected in the letter of the law or halls of justice. These most basic ideas that men are born equally and freely into this world. It was my belief that we might still preserve some of that which we had taken pride in the entirety of our lives. That insistence that we wished not new rights, but a restoration of the old ones, that we might declare them. Create a Bill of Rights the likes of the world has not seen, more glorious than the glorious Revolution. That was my desire, my belief. And yet, what is it that they say when you have too many cooks but one kitchen? You know, ultimately I would retire, not from the committee in its entirety at the end of the day, back to my lodging house there, where I attempted to give form those liberal sentiments that we might preserve that which preceded us and ought to be guaranteed for our children. I began by asking how many of you here were familiar with the name of Colonel George Mason. I did not care for the notoriety. You need not remember me. I not only will allow it, I should beg that you might forget my name upon exiting here, but do not forget the words that I originally wrote. Do not forget what was done there. Or you might not know me, but I do hope you have heard words of our Declaration of Rights here in Virginia. That all men are born equally free and independent, and have certain inherent natural rights of which they cannot deprive or divest their posterity. Namely, the enjoyment of life and liberty, the means of acquiring and possessing property, pursuing happiness and safety. 2, that all powers vested in and consequently derived from the people. Magistrates are their trustees and servants, and at all times amenable to them. 3, the government is or ought to be instituted for the common benefit, the general safety of a people, nation, or community. Of all the various modes and forms of government, that is best which is most capable of producing the greatest degree of happiness, and most effectually secured against the dangers of maladministration. And that whenever any government is found to be contrary or inadequate to those purposes, a majority of the community has the indubitable, inalienable, and indefeasible right to reform, alter, or abolish. Now, it will surprise no one here to know that I was not nearly so concise. Not just those ephemeral, amorphous ideas of what a government is or ought to be, but so too, for the first time ever, to truly place reins upon a government, not just a monarch, not just an executive, but a government in its entirety. For the first time ever, here, declared in that building, that we would have a separation of the powers. Never again should but one man hold the power of the executive, legislative, and judicative. Here, for the first time, declared ever that a man cannot be born a magistrate, or a judge, or a legislature. No, such ideas are unnatural and absurd. And perhaps most importantly, it were not the reins placed upon the government. Let us never celebrate the stick more than the carrot. No, instead it was something not with the eyes towards the government, but a heart of the people. That there are certain inherent rights that cannot be taken away. Yes, in the terms of jurisprudence, trials, by jury, to face one's accusers. Yes, those were guaranteed in there, but more importantly, was insisted upon rights to a free press, free exercise of religion, or how else might a people truly be free, mind, body, heart, and soul? 10, all told by my hand. 2 more with the assistance of Thomas Ludwell Lee. We submitted those to the committee on the 26th of May, 1776. Once within that, they grew to 18 articles and shrunk down to 16 sections, all through the magic of committee, ratified upon the 12th of June, 1776. As men in Philadelphia still decided whether or not they would even draft a declaration, here in Virginia we had set forward a plan for our independence. We may never truly know how greatly they were influenced, but I am pleased that we were given the opportunity. But I had begun by saying I wished to engage with you in conversation, to know the sentiment of the people, and I found myself droning on here for far too long. I apologize. Please understand, I have 9 children at home. I have long since been taught if I allow a word in edgewise, I have lost the entirety of conversation for the afternoon. And to that end, I wish to turn over the last little portion of this to you. If you have any questions or curiosities of me about our 5th Virginia Convention, of our hopes for the future, or if you merely wish to ask after my family and my farm, I should be happy to address any and all. In our last moments together, I merely ask a simple raising of one's hand. Put forward such questions. Do I see a hand? Just
Yeah, mine.
Yeah.
Up here?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, yes.
Yes, okay. You said that you believe that all men were created equal. What about women? What about women?
The question was asked, do we, that I say that all men are created equal, what about women? Well, the true question is the larger one, what women? We might engage with my philosophy upon this matter, madam, certainly, but that might get us only but so far. Let us understand the philosophy of our government. For women here in Virginia are understood to have the same rights as man. So in this manner, yes, when the term all men is used, it is one of mankind in that way. Just as Though I do not speak it, I've been able to read some. If you have within French, I believe Spanish is the same manner, many of the romances. If you have a singular of a group of people, does it take the masculine or the feminine? Typically it takes the masculine, and thus we see all men to be inclusive. But that also begs then the larger question. Do we mean all women? The law certainly does not think so. After all, who is clearly excluded from this, from a government's perspective, not necessarily from a philosophical law?
Slaves.
What type of women? What type of men, for that matter?
Enslaved.
There you have it. Depends not upon the sex of the person, but instead their skin color. Even if one is free person, black person here in the city does not have the same rights as a poor white one. We must also even recognize that is true not only of the black population, free or enslaved, but so to the native peoples here, long conquered and tributary in their nature. Those women have not the same rights as their white counterparts here in the city. They are not part of our society, and therefore they are not granted such things. Again, we may engage with philosophy. It is my philosophical belief that yes, truly all are born equally free and independent, but we must recognize, does the law at present here in Virginia see all men as being equal?
No.
Unfortunately not. Brings me very much to the crux of what I first asked. How willing are individuals to see change here, now that we have declared ourselves independent? As it was originally written, is how I stated it here. Ultimately, madam, it was declared that we cannot move forward as such. We cannot begin upon a lie. And as it is not true here in Virginia that all men are born equally free and independent, they quickly went about altering that first line. Instead, it would conclude to read that all men are by nature equally free and independent, have certain inherent rights, which, when they enter a state of society, a curious phrase, yes? But one we recognize. After all, why could we not declare all 13 of these colonies free? We must have the people of Pennsylvania have their say. They're not part of our society. We are not part of theirs. We cannot declare them free any more than we can declare the people of France free. But there is another curiosity. After all, what are slaves first and foremost here in Virginia?
Property.
Property. Is property part of society?
No.
No. So I apologize, madam. I realized that I had taken something of a turn from your initial question, but it was not discussed, for women were already recognized to have all of the same rights as men, if not the same privileges of men here in society. But it is, of course, a curious question of who is truly considered to be equal in the eyes of the law here in Virginia.
Well, thank you, sir. You gave me a very interesting answer.
I gave you a very long answer. It was interesting. Though I should also say this, the debate that followed after the initial introduction was far longer than what I provided you there. I promise you that was a far shorter answer than had you been sitting with us there within the committee. Other questions? I thank you, yes. Yes, the gentleman highlights, I think, perhaps demonstrating better and more succinctly than I have, the changeability of man. As he highlights that within the Declaration of Rights, we essentially declare ourselves free and independent, separate from our mother country in England. And yet, the Fairfax Resolves, which I thank the gentleman for offering me authorship over it, though I should say, though primary author of that, so too I took it to others, chiefly my neighbor and representative at the time, Colonel Washington. He has since received a promotion, of course. But in it I write that we desired a continued connection with our mother country, would happily desire a continued connection. But as I stated earlier, much like my letter some 7 years ago, within it I stated that I desired a continued connection with our mother country, so long as we would not be treated as slaves. And if we wish to be flippant about it, who ultimately broke the contract betwixt king and country here in our land?
The king?
It wasn't us. It wasn't Virginians. It wasn't even, though I'm sure they would love to claim it, New Englanders. No, it was the king that broke that contract. After all, the king's title, King George III, one whose name were not dragged through the mud, only until recently here. For a long time, we were angry with Parliament, but we hoped that the king would not be so ill influenced by his counsel. And so there was still some desired continued connection, not dissimilar from what we see as those up in Canada at present, a respect for, though, of their own land. But ultimately, if the king is the leader of the one true faith, leader over Scotland, Ireland, and all of his realms, Lord Protector. Lord Protector. If the king is the one who then has the authority and chooses to send soldiers to spill the blood of his subjects, thus breaking the contract, no longer being Lord Protectorate and protecting his subjects, who has broken that contract?
The king.
King. Not us. Though I should say I was already moving away from such thoughts, but knowing others in Fairfax County, namely those who carry the name, there was a desire that they might stand. The Fairfaxes were well acknowledged by my neighbor, Colonel Washington, at the time, that the Fairfax might be there upon the calling, but even he recognized that he was not in the majority opinion, or not even in most any opinions with his more loyalist leanings. We were in a unique time. I know you did not exactly propose a question, I only sensed it in your demonstration of my contradictory statements. You take a whole man's life, I should say all sorts of things that disagree with myself. Honestly, on a good day, I can argue with myself over far less than this. I believe I might have time for perhaps one last question. Are there any outstanding here? Seeing none, having clearly arrived at the, oh, yes. Related to George Mason University.
Oh.
Let it never be said that George Mason is a university man. I did not attend a college in my lifetime, though I should say this. I have great appreciation for education, making certain my mother and I even to send my younger brother to the Inns of Court of London that he might become a proper barrister. The curiosity of my property is that there is a small building solely for the education of my own children and any of the nearby children of planters or farmers that are able to spare their children to enjoy an education from the tutors that I might bring there. I should hope that there is always a good place for education in Northern Virginia, and I imagine that in 200 years they want some of my properties that I certain they may be used for such purposes. But I have no interest in beginning a school. No, in fact, let me address a few other curious questions that I sometimes get that puzzle me so, but I shall illuminate you. Though I carry the name of Mason, I do not practice the art of bricklaying. I'm not part of the Free Order of. I did not draw a line with a Mr. Dixon, and I have nothing to do with a jar. And upon that most appropriate, if you like, conclusion, I should end upon this sensibility. As we have long discussed, we cannot, it seems, entirely crack not what is man's nature, changing, ever constant, or as stated over here, perhaps both. We have now created government with the reflection of its people, that we have put people in the power of that government, and therefore we can never be, we may be frustrated at times with our government. We're being too constant, we're not changing quick enough. We may be excited with the change that our government might provide us. We might be scared of the change it wishes to enact. It may do both of these things. We may be frustrated, we may celebrate it, but we can never be surprised by it. Upon that consideration, I believe I shall conclude by congratulating you all upon American independency. Together we might celebrate American liberty. Happiness and prosperity are well within your reach, but to attain it, to preserve it, must always rely upon your own wisdom and virtue. To that end, friends, if we are ever to meet again, I will be your humble and obedient servant, Colonel G. Mason.
Thank you.